December 1941. Snow fell over Detroit's River Rouge complex, muting the usual thunder of engines and stamping presses. Inside the Ford plant, men worked with their collars up and their breath fogging in the air, unsure what the next week would bring. Only one thing was certain now: America was at war. Jack Morley stood at the edge of the assembly line, a clipboard in one hand, a cigarette in the other. He was 42, an engineer by trade and a mechanic by instinct, the kind of man who could diagnose a misfiring carburetor just by listening to it cough. Before Pearl Harbor, he'd spent a decade designing V8 engines for Ford's luxury sedans. Now he was staring at blueprints for something he'd never seen before, a wing section for a bomber. "Mr. Morley?" a young foreman called, his voice carrying over the clatter of steel. "Washington just sent the specs. They want to start tooling for the B-24. Full production in 6 months. Jack exhaled slowly. 6 months to turn a car factory into an aircraft plant. It sounded impossible, but so did everything else about this war. The arsenal of democracy. President Roosevelt's words still echoed across the nation's radios. We must be the great arsenal of democracy. Detroit took those words personally. Overnight, car companies became defense contractors. Ford built bombers. Chrysler built tanks. General Motors built engines, guns, even torpedoes. But none of it happened smoothly. Every car factory in the country was designed for repetition, a single model, a fixed rhythm, a narrow margin for error. Bombers, on the other hand, were intricate machines made from aluminum, hydraulics, and endless miles of wiring. Each required over 1 million parts. The men who once bragged about turning out a Model T every 49 seconds were now struggling to fit an airplane wing into a building that had never seen one. Jack knew it better than anyone. He'd walked those lines his whole life. He could sense the factory's heartbeat, its tempo, its tension. Now that rhythm was broken. Bolts jammed, rigs failed. The stamping machines that had shaped car doors buckled, trying to form aircraft panels. Production crawled. At night, Jack drove home through the blackout streets of Dearborn, headlights dimmed under wartime orders. The snow glittered like steel shavings under the moonlight. At home, his wife Helen listened to the news, hands clasped around a chipped mug. Their son Michael had enlisted in the Army Air Corps just weeks before. Jack never said it aloud, but every problem he solved at the plant felt personal now. Every bolt tightened, every weld corrected. Maybe, somewhere down the line, it would keep his boy alive. Willow Run. By early 1942, Ford had broken ground on a new facility outside Ypsilanti, Willow Run. It was designed to be the largest factory on Earth, a single mile-long building shaped like an airplane's wing. There, the B-24 Liberator bomber would roll off the line like a car. Henry Ford's dream was as ambitious as it was insane. 1 bomber every hour. A machine that once took a small army of craftsmen 3 months to assemble by hand would now be mass-produced by factory workers who'd never even seen one fly. Jack Morley was transferred there in March to help design the production flow. He arrived to find chaos, mud, scaffolding, and hundreds of half-finished machines. Engineers shouted over the roar of cranes. Trucks came and went without schedules. The blueprints changed weekly. Still, there was something intoxicating about the place. It felt like standing inside America's determination itself, noisy, unpolished, but unstoppable. "Think of it, Jack," said Ed Crawford, another Ford engineer, clapping him on the shoulder. "A mile of factory. We'll build planes faster than they can shoot 'em down." Jack smiled faintly. "If we can figure out how to make the parts fit." That was the problem. The B-24 wasn't built like a car. Every fuselage section came from a different subcontractor, Cleveland, Buffalo, Wichita, and nothing quite lined up. Bolts missed their holes by fractions of an inch. Wiring harnesses were too short. Hydraulic lines bent in the wrong direction. Every error meant delays. Delays meant fewer planes. And fewer planes meant more dead boys over Europe. Jack worked 12-hour days, sometimes 14, sleeping on a cot in his office. He sketched modifications by lamplight, redrew jigs and recalibrated presses. He was chasing a rhythm that refused to be found. The assembly bottleneck. By summer, the problem reached its peak. Willow Run could build parts, lots of them, but final assembly lagged behind. Airframes stacked up like driftwood in a frozen river. The line stopped every few hours because the next section wasn't ready or didn't fit. Washington was furious. The newspapers mocked Ford's Wonder Factory. Riveters worked double shifts, but planes still sat unfinished. Jack was summoned to a late-night meeting in the operations office. The room was thick with cigarette smoke and tension. A general from Washington stood at the front, glaring. "Gentlemen," he said, tapping a pointer against the map, "we need bombers over Europe now, not excuses. We can't fight the Luftwaffe with paperwork." No one spoke. Jack stared at the production charts, columns of red ink marking missed quotas. Somewhere in that chaos was an answer. He just had to see it. The idea. That night, wandering the empty plant floor, Jack noticed something odd. A group of night shift welders were improvising, pre-assembling small subframes before they reached the main line. It wasn't standard procedure, but it made their section run smoother. He stopped one of them, a young man with a face blackened by soot. "Why are you doing it that way?" Jack asked. The welder shrugged. "Easier to line up the holes now than when it's hanging overhead. We prep it in place, then move it down the line." Jack stared at the setup for a long time. Pre-assembly, parallel flow, independent modules. That was it. They'd been building the bombers like cars, one long chain, one failure killing the whole line. But what if each section could move separately, built in smaller units and joined at the end? Aircraft assembly lines couldn't move like cars. They had to breathe like living machines. By dawn, Jack had drawn a new system. Modular jigs, mobile platforms, synchronized sublines feeding a single final line. It wasn't in the manual. It wasn't in any book. But it could work. Resistance. When he presented the plan to the managers, they laughed. "That's not how Ford builds things. We've done single-line production for 20 years. "I know," Jack said, "and it works for cars. But we're not building Fords anymore. We're building wings." It took weeks of arguments, calculations, and trial runs. But by late September, they tested Jack's system on one wing section. The difference was immediate. Output doubled, defects dropped. Within 2 months, Willow Run reorganized its entire production floor around the new flow. By Christmas 1942, the impossible was happening. Bombers rolling off the line faster than anyone thought possible. The rhythm returns. The first fully mass-produced B-24 rolled out under its own power on a cold February morning. It glittered under the factory lights, a silver giant born not in the sky, but from the heartbeat of industry. The workers gathered to watch it taxi out. Some cheered, others just stared in quiet disbelief. Jack stood with a coffee in his hand, too tired to smile, but too proud to speak. A reporter from the Detroit Free Press asked for his name, but he waved him off. "Just another wrench turner," he said. Within a year, Willow Run was producing one bomber every 63 minutes. The line ran 24 hours a day. Women joined the workforce by the thousands, riveting, welding, inspecting, their bandanas bright against the gray of the machines. Detroit's skyline glowed red at night from the furnaces. Across town, Chrysler's tank arsenal in Warren was churning out Shermans by the hundreds. GM built engines for fighters, propellers for bombers, and trucks that crawled across Africa and France. Detroit had become what Roosevelt promised, the arsenal of democracy. Over Europe. By 1944, the sky over Europe was thick with the thunder of American planes. B-24s from Willow Run flew missions across Germany, dropping the bombs that broke the Nazi war machine. Jack followed every dispatch. He marked the routes on a wall map in his office. North Africa, Italy, Normandy. Somewhere among those formations might be his son's plane. Then one morning in March, he got the letter. Missing in action, presumed downed over Bremen. He read it once, twice, then folded it carefully and put it in his jacket pocket. That night he didn't go home. He walked the factory floor instead, listening to the hum of the machines. The line kept moving, wings, fuselages, engines, one after another, unending. For the first time he realized the full meaning of what they'd built. It wasn't just planes. It was a bridge of metal and sweat between home and the front. Every rivet was a heartbeat. He stood beside the newest bomber, its nose art freshly painted, Lucky Lady. The smell of fuel filled the air. Somewhere above, the rafters shook as another test engine roared to life. "Keep them flying," he whispered. The end of the war. When the war finally ended in 1945, Detroit erupted. Factories blew their whistles for hours. The city's skyline shimmered with fireworks. Workers poured into the streets, hugging, crying, singing. At Willow Run, the lines went quiet for the first time in years. Jack walked through the empty hangar, the floor littered with metal shavings and paper tags. The silence was deafening. He found one of the last completed bombers parked near the doors, its silver skin reflecting the sunset. He climbed the ladder into the cockpit and sat where the pilot would have, hands on the yoke, eyes on the horizon. He imagined his son sitting there once, somewhere far away, flying a machine built by these same hands, these same tools. He imagined him coming home. Epilogue. In the decades that followed, the world moved on. Detroit went back to making cars, and the roar of war gave way to the rumble of peacetime industry. The Willow Run plant closed, reopened, and finally fell silent. But for those few years, it was the beating heart of America, a place where riveters and dreamers, engineers and welders, men and women together, built the wings that carried freedom across an ocean. Historians would later credit Willow Run with producing over 8,600 bombers, more than any other plant in the world. They'd talk about Henry Ford's vision, Edsel Ford's leadership, and the genius of American industry. Few would remember Jack Morley, the engineer who reimagined how machines could be born. But in a quiet corner of the old factory museum, among rusted jigs and faded photos, there's a small plaque that reads, "Dedicated to the men and women who made America's wings. They built not just planes, but victory itself." And if you listen closely, when the wind passes through the broken windows of the old plant, it still sounds like the hum of a factory line, a rhythm that once lifted a nation into the sky.